Welcome to the Full Nelson. Today I'm going to be giving you guys some advice or guidance when it comes to purchasing an AR-15. For those of you who are new to the AR-15 market, you're going to get tons of misinformation. Guys who will tell you cheap budget AR-15s are garbage. You got to spend a minimum of $1,500 if you want to bet your life on it, or up to $5,000 or whatever, and they'll tell you, less expensive AR-15s are garbage. I have owned a lot of AR-15s over the years from many different manufacturers. I've owned Smith & Wesson, I've owned Delton, I've owned Colt, I've owned Core rifles, I've owned Anderson rifles, I've owned one couple that I have now, Wise Arms AR-15 rifles. There's tons of, I've shot Bushmasters and DPMS and a lot of AR-15s. When the first AR-15 I bought, and hopefully this will help you guys understand where I'm coming from, I didn't own one at the time, and prices were coming down on them to where budget AR-15s like the sport models, whether it's a DPMS, Oracle, or Sport, or whatever, that was a cheap one. And Smith & Wesson came out with the M&P 15 Sport. Ruger's got a lower end model now, and they're $500-600. Seems like a pretty reasonable price. And I went to buy one of those as my first AR, and was reading all kinds of stuff on the internet when these companies were releasing these ARs at a cheaper price point. And guys who spent twice as much or 3 times as much on an AR from the same company would say, well, there's something wrong with that one. That's a piece of junk. You can't bet your life on it. It's going to break when you need it the most. And yeah, so I heard all kinds of stuff like that. And it can be, frustrating and trying to find out, okay, well, what is a good one then that's still at a reasonable price or whatever. Anyway, what I found back then is I thought, well, I wonder if there's anything to what these guys are saying, that this M&P 15 Sport is actually inferior to, Smith & Wesson's higher end ARs. Are the internal components different? Is it just aesthetics? What is it? Well, my findings from discussions with people at the gun shop, and also with discussions, I called Smith & Wesson and asked one of their techs about it. I said, I really want to know about this. Is there an internal difference? In other words, do you use a low-end bolt carrier group on your Smith & Wesson M&P 15 Sport, and then a much better bolt carrier group on your higher-end AR-15s? Are you using, better materials for your upper and lower? Is it like a different aluminum? Are they made totally different? Are there internal differences between the lower end buffer tube assembly, buffers, all that, your lower end Smith & Wesson Sport, and your higher end models? And the answer that I found is that there's no difference on the internal components. Now, I don't know if that's still the case, and I don't know that that's the case with every single company, but I think that is probably the case with most companies. It doesn't make a lot of sense if you're sourcing bolt carrier groups to source some cheap Chinese knockoff bolt carrier groups or whatever to put in your lower end ARs, and then source really high end bolt carrier groups for your more expensive ARs. If you can just source all your bolt carrier groups and make sure the quality control is good on them across the board, you're going to have a good reputation. So that's what I found, is that the internal components, the parts that actually matter to make the gun run properly and be reliable, are the same on the majority of AR-15s. So if you buy like a low-end Delton or a really high-end Delton, unless you get into like a nitride bolt carrier group, which those are dirt cheap nowadays, or a nickel boron bolt carrier group, that's going to cost you a little more. But most of those manufacturers like Smith & Wesson and stuff don't necessarily offer bolt carrier groups that are nickel plated or any of those special platings or any of that type of stuff. It's just a standard bolt carrier group, and they basically put the same thing in all of them. Now, they do quality control testing, but most of those guys are doing the same quality control testing on their lower end AR-15 bolt carrier groups as what they're doing on their higher end ones. That's something a lot of people won't tell you. And a lot of these guys who are building these rifles, especially the high end, what I consider kind of the elitist AR-15s, whether it's Barrett, whether it's and they're excellent rifles. I'm not saying their rifles aren't good. I'm just saying the price on them that would lead you to believe that, wow, this is just a way better deal. If it's just a direct gas impingement AR, whether it's from Daniel Defense or whether it's Smith & Wesson M&P Sport, oftentimes the difference there is marketing. The difference there is, in the mindset. The difference there is in the fit and finish or the features. It's got a nicer rail, nicer handguard, nicer buttstock, nicer pistol grip. This is a stabilizer, not a buttstock, but anyway, it's got nicer features than what you might get on a less expensive AR. Nicer finish, all those types of things. But with the mechanical function of what you hear from people about, that one's going to get you killed and stuff like that, baloney. Okay, that's what I found. That's BS. I've shot really cheap ones to quite expensive ones. Not a lick of difference between any of them. Now, I haven't put, like some of these guys you'll hear about, well, I went out yesterday and put 5,000 rounds through my AR. I haven't done that. I will go out and put, there are times when I'll shoot 200 or 300 rounds in a session, and I'm not just plinking away slow and then letting the barrel cool down. I mean, I'm on it some of the time, and then other times I'll be shooting a little slower at further distances. But I have no problem doing full mag dump after mag dump, running a couple mags through it in a row like that, and then maybe I'll be shooting slower or whatever. So I'm not babying the thing is what I'm getting at, and I haven't found any difference between Colt or the nice Core 15 that I owned or any of those that cost me, $1,200, $1,500. Now they're way less expensive now than I'm found with the less expensive ones. So, is there a difference between different manufacturers? Yes, there is. Some of them I would certainly trust a little more than others, but for the most part, most of them today are doing a pretty good job, is what I have found. Now, for me, if I were going to buy a budget AR-15, I don't know how to build anything, customize it myself, and I don't want to learn any of that. I just want to buy it and be done with it. I would recommend Smith & Wesson, Ruger, Delton, a lot of those companies that make budget ARs over companies like Bushmaster and DPMS right now. That's because DPMS and Bushmaster are owned by the Freedom Group, and their quality control over the years has just gone downhill, in my opinion. Anyway, that's just been my personal experience. So if you're looking for a budget AR, those are the companies I would prefer to deal with. I also think their customer service is head and shoulders above DPMS or Bushmaster. Okay, so I would go with one of those. Now, the way I buy my AR-15s nowadays is I build most of mine. I've watched some videos out there, these tactical instructors and other people. Don't build your own AR. Go buy one that works. These guys have spent years training and all this kind of stuff to build them. Yeah, they have spent a lot of time. They know how to build a rifle properly, the guys that are doing it right, and they stand behind them and stuff like that. But I have seen AR-15s, even expensive ones, have issues. And, this is one of the things that really cracked me up. When I bought that first Smith & Wesson M&P Sport, and then I bought some more budget ones, then I bought higher end ones, and now I'm actually back down to buying budget ones, and I turn them into exactly what I want if they don't come that way. What I found is that with my M&P Sport, it would eat anything I fed it. Steel case, you name it. Any bullet. I never found a bullet that it had issues or rounds that had issues feeding. And then I would have these guys who would own really expensive AR-15s, $1,500 rifles all the way up to several $1,000s, and they would say, well, mine doesn't feed steel case, but that's because it's a high-end AR, and higher-end ARs are only designed to feed brass ammo, and it's because, it's better quality and the tolerances are tighter and all this kind of stuff. Baloney. Okay? If your rifle does not feed pretty much everything you feed it, you need to make some changes. You don't have to replace the whole rifle, but I changed the barrel out. My expectation is that it will feed anything I throw at it. One of the things that makes handguns really reliable, and 1911s can be reliable, but one of the issues that is notorious with 1911s is that the tolerances are tighter. They're built to be more of a precision handgun, whereas a Glock is built to be like more like an AK. Looser tolerances. This is not gonna. You can actually set the bullets down in the barrel and wiggle them around. That's how loose the tolerances are. And the reason they do that is to gain reliability. Even if the gun's dirty, no lubrication, nothing, they run. And my philosophy with an AR is the same thing. Now, if I'm shooting, precision groups or something, then you might be worried about the tolerances being just mega tight. I'm not interested in that. I buy these things for self-defense, and I need them to work every time I pull the trigger. And a common issue I have found with a lot of AR-15s from low end to high end, and it's not on all of them, but I have seen it on a semi-regular basis, so I'm going to explain it to you guys and then tell you a fix for it, is that you'll run brass ammunition, then you run steel case, and when the bolt slams home, you'll go to grab the charging handle, and the charging handle is bound. A lot of guys don't know what's causing that. They're like, oh, it's just this junky steel case. The casing itself must be getting caught in the chamber. In my experience, it's usually not the casing. Oftentimes, it's the bullet itself. The overall length of the bullet may not be the same as what you're accustomed to running in your firearm. And I've even seen this with these particular bullets I've got here. Arms Core, I don't know if they're not to spec or what the deal is. But when I chamber around, in all of, I had a whole bunch of ARs chambered around in all of them and it'd be fine. And then I had one that I had purchased and I chamber around and it would go in there, the bolt would bind, I couldn't open it back up. And when I finally battered it to open it up, the round would still be stuck in the rifling of the rifle and the case would separate, dump gunpowder all over the place with that bullet still stuck in the rifling of my rifle. This is one of the number one things I would recommend that you pay attention to when you buy an AR. Go home, take a variety of loads, try chambering around, then try to clear the weapon. So drop the magazine out, rack the slide back, and it should be nice and easy no matter what bullets you put in there to or pull the charging handle back and eject the casing. Whether it's been fired or not, it should be easy. If your gun doesn't do that, I don't care how much you paid for it, you need to swap the barrel out and get one that is actually cut with the tolerances loose enough or to spec or whatever that it will accommodate that. Okay, that's my feeling on it. I've had some that had that. I swapped the barrel out of them myself, checked it with the cartridge, no problem. Some of them I sent back to the manufacturer with different manufacturers, told them what the issue was. I don't know if they went in there and cut it a little bit further so that there'd be a little bit more of a jump for my bullets and I wouldn't run into that issue. Totally solved the problem. So one way or another, you can deal with that. But I have not seen that from Smith & Wesson, Ruger, any of the big companies that manufacture budget ARs. If you go with something like a Palmetto State Armory, and I have nothing against them, or if you go with something like an Anderson Arms from different manufacturers, there's all of these other companies that have popped up that are making them, you're probably more likely to see that. It's not an issue if you actually learn about AR-15s and you understand, okay, well, these tolerances are too tight, so I can send that back to the manufacturer and have them fix that, or I can just pull the barrel and swap it myself. Barrels are cheap. You can buy barrels for $80, so just swap the barrel out yourself, sell your old one on eBay or whatever and say it's been fired once or hardly fired, runs most ammunition fine, but has an issue with this particular type. Maybe somebody will pick it up that knows how to cut that a little bit further themselves, or is simply okay with, it's going to be a plinking gun. They're okay with it not eating everything that they feed it. So, yeah. So if you aren't mechanically inclined, don't want to do any of the stuff yourself, don't want to work on them yourself, I recommend, as I mentioned, Ruger, Smith & Wesson, Delton. Those are probably the best budget ARs you're going to get for the price. If you are mechanically inclined, you can spend even less money than what you would spend on those and buy Anderson Arms. There's, I think, Bear Creek Arsenal. There's Mid-State Firearms or something like that, Palmetto State. Wise Arms is one that I bought a lot from. He's good, lifetime warranty on all of his stuff. I've had to send only one of this 4 or 5 of them, or half a dozen of them I bought from him. Only had to send one back that had that issue that I just explained. He took care of it. And buying AR-15s from Palmetto State, Wise Arms, all these other companies I mentioned, the benefit is that they often come with key mod handguards or M-lock cam guards, and they're still less money than what you're going to spend on a Ruger or Smith & Wesson. So by the time you spend $500, $600 on a Ruger or Smith & Wesson, even on their lower end models, if you then want to swap it out and put a free float handguard on it or put a different pistol grip or a different buttstock, you're going to be adding, you know, $100 to $150 to that price. So that's why I generally buy, you know, some of these other ones, because I know what I'm doing. Get an armor's wrench, the vice block, all that type of stuff, so you can swap those things around yourself. The notion that, you know, it takes some, you know, you have to be this mechanic that's done it for 100 years to build an AR is just silly. It's just ridiculous. It's like some people that say, well, you got to take your car to the mechanic if you want them to be, you know, to replace the starter, or a job that may be a really simple job on a lot of cars that's literally 2 or 3 bolts. You know, give me a break. I don't buy into that. I don't care how much experience you've got. I've got a lot of experience building ARs. That's nonsense. Watch some videos or some tutorials. Anybody can do it and learn how to do it right. So, yeah, that's my rant on that. So that's my advice as far as shopping for an AR-15. Most of the time when you spend more money, you're getting a nicer finish, whether it's Cerakote or something like that that's going to look nicer. You're not going to see as many of the imperfections in certain things. You're going to have nicer furniture from the factory, whether it's nicer handguards in some instances, or pistol grips, or any of that type of stuff, or buttstocks, or whatever. But in terms of the raw functionality of the AR, on a lot of ARs, like I said, Smith & Wesson and some of those, there is not a lick of difference between the lower end and the higher end ARs that they make in terms of just the sheer functionality of the platform. You can also, you know, with higher end guns, get nicer barrels that are chrome lined or stuff like that that may last you longer. But when barrels cost you, for a standard stainless barrel or a chrome ollie barrel, they're $80 a piece, I can afford to swap that barrel off a whole bunch of times before I get into the price of what a chrome plated AR barrel is going to cost me. So I generally don't worry about any of that stuff. That's just not a big deal to me. Anyway, if you guys have any questions or comments about AR-15s, or, you know, want to share your experience about what you found with different, you know, AR-15s from different manufacturers, feel free to leave that information in the comment section below. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you found it helpful. Have a nice day.